let's take a minute now to just take a look at some of the things that were going on with the band in 1974, take an overview of that year. Well, as they got off the road from their European tour in 1973, in the fall of 1973, they went right into the studios in Munich, Germany, of all places, to begin recording the album that would become It's Only Rock and Roll. This recording beginning in November 1973 and then resuming again in January of 1974. There's kind of a story about what was going to happen with this album, how it was originally conceived as a half live album, half cover versions album, but we'll come to that in the next video when we talk about the album itself. They continued with sessions in London and at Stargroves using the mobile unit in March and May of 1974. Also in May of 1974, Bill Wyman releases his solo album. The album is called Monkey Grip. It includes lots of musicians that play on the Bill Wyman record, including Dr. John, Leon Russell, who we mentioned a little bit earlier this week, and guitarist Lowell George. Talking about Bill Wyman and him releasing a solo album reminds us that Bill Wyman has been producing and writing music all along, but kind of not been being treated at all like an equal member on the Rolling Stones when it comes to getting his material on the records. He's hardly ever got, I mean, we talk about one instance so far where Bill Wyman has gotten one of his songs on the record. So he had these other outlets. And so, well, we're beginning to see that he wanted to have his own group to do his own kind of music, and that being locked out of the Mick and Keith sort of monopoly on material is something that would also play a role in Mick Taylor's departure from the group. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But anyway, let's give notice to Bill Wyman for that album Monkey Grip, and he would continue to release solo albums and continues currently. In the summer of 1974, the single "It's Only Rock and Roll" is released. Through the Lonely Nights is the B-side on that. The song "It's Only Rock and Roll" gets to number 16 in the US, number 10 in the UK. You might say, gosh, where are the number one singles? Well, don't forget, we're talking album-oriented music now, so it's really the performance of the album that's of most interest to us. It's Only Rock and Roll. The album is released in October of 1974, and the single that's released at about the same time is the album is their cover of The Temptations' Ain't Too Proud to Beg, backed by Dance Little Sister. That single, Ain't Too Proud to Beg, goes to number 17 in the pop charts. Well, on December the 12th, 1974, Mick Taylor officially quits the band, or it's announced that Mick Taylor is leaving the Rolling Stones. And you might say to yourself, and people have asked Mick Taylor over the years, why did you quit the Rolling Stones? The biggest rock and roll band, arguably, the biggest rock and roll band in the world at the time. Why would you give that gig up? And in retrospect, it doesn't look like it was the wisest career decision, because after he left the Rolling Stones, Mick Taylor didn't have anything like the kind of success that he'd enjoyed while he was with the group. Although musically, I think he might have been a lot more satisfied with what he was doing. And that's the first reason why Mick Taylor might have wanted to leave the Rolling Stones. He's given some room to roam on those tunes with regard to his guitar playing, but not a lot. And so I think that musically, Mick Taylor wanted to explore a lot of different kinds of things that musicianly kinds of players, places they want to go. But Mick and Keith understood that what they had really was a kind of a pop rock band here, and they had to keep things pretty close to what was, the kind of Rolling Stones orbit of what it is that they did. And so we talked about Mick Taylor kind of changing the group and sort of pushing them more toward this virtuosity element. But even as much as he was able to do that, I think that probably there wasn't enough of that in the group for him, and he was interested in seeking other opportunities where he could stretch out a little bit more as a guitarist. Also, there were some Well, there was some resentment brewing about songwriting credits. There were things where he felt like he'd made important contribution where he should have gotten songwriting credit. And that this is not just about getting a pat on the back, okay, well, you wrote this song too, that's great. But there's publishing money that comes with these songwriting credits. And that's both why he was frustrated and why Mick and Keith didn't cut him in for a part of it. Because in a lot of rock bands, no matter who contributes to the arrangement of a tune, who's given credit for the tune has to do with the kind of understanding of who's being paid what inside the group. And these publishing royalties are a way that people get paid. And Mick Taylor wasn't being paid for that. And he kind of wished that he was, I think, or at least wished that it was acknowledged that when he'd made important contributions. And so that wasn't happening so much. But the reason that he's given, and maybe it's because he's a very gracious man who doesn't want to feel in any way, doesn't want to sound in any way ungrateful for the time that he spent with the Stones and the opportunities that it gave him. He said that the problem for him was that it was a kind of a drug and lifestyle fatigue. That is the idea that he'd sort of gotten hooked on drugs and he didn't like where things were headed. And the only way he could get away from that was to get away from this band. As long as he was in this band, that behavior on his part was going to continue. So he had to separate himself out from this group and the lifestyle of the group in order to be able to bring himself back to better health and better sort of lifestyle and this kind of thing. So maybe ultimately that is the thing that made the difference for Mick Taylor. But anyway, by the end of 1974, he was out of the group. In May of 1975, Ron Wood was announced as the new member to replace Mick Taylor, and the group, the Rolling Stones, went on their June-August tour of the United States, this time called the 1975 Tour of the Americas, though this really only means US and Canada. Best I can tell, they never went to Central America or South America during this tour. There are no gigs like that listed. They did go to Buffalo, however. Nevertheless, a big tour, Ron Wood on board there. And there is a story that Ron Wood tells of Mick Taylor, Mick Jagger, and Ron Wood kind of sitting next to each other at a party one night. And, they're sitting there and Mick Taylor says to Mick Jagger, you know what? I'm quitting the group. And he gets up and walks away. And Mick Jagger says to Ron Wood, what am I going to do? Mick Taylor just quit the band. Would you be interested? And Ron Wood says, yes. Well, that's a great kind of story to tell, but not really quite sure. Things are usually a little bit more complicated than that. But you're going to, if you're watching the videos that I'm recommending, you're going to see a bit of that. And anyway, if we think about the end of an era, this definitely is the end of the Mick Taylor era. And so in many ways, what our course has done is really kind of outlined the time when Brian Jones was with the group and then the time in which Mick Taylor was with the group. And if we would continue on, it would be then time to sort of talk about the Ron Wood era when he was a part of the group. So that lies beyond the scope of what we're doing. So in the next video, let's take a look at this album, which already, interestingly, features Ron Wood in an important capacity. The album is It's Only Rock and Roll.